Welcome, everybody. My name is Christine Curry, and I am the Iowa Outreach Coordinator of the Izaak Walton League's Upper Mississippi River Initiative. Welcome to our 2023 series on soil and water conservation, Thinking Like a Watershed program. The monthly presentations are jointly hosted with our Izaak Walton League colleagues of the Upper Mississippi River Initiative, and co-hosts include Panora Conservation Chapter member Chris Henning this evening. And thank you all for joining us this Valentine's evening. We are going to share some green love with you, the Green Amendment movement as a path to environmental health, with Maya K. Van Rossum, founder of the Green Amendment for the Generations. How the Green Amendment movement is incorporating constitutional rights at the state level to codify a healthy environment. Montana, Pennsylvania, and most recently New York have green amendments incorporated into their state constitutions that guarantee environmental protections. Author and attorney Maya K. Van Rossum says clean air and water and a stable climate are entitlements for all, coining the phrase in her 2017 book by the same title. Van Rossum and her nonprofit, the Green Amendments for Generations, are on a national campaign to protect the planet by bringing more states on board. Iowa, for example, was introduced to Green Amendment legislation on Earth Day 2021 by Representative Chuck Eisenhart. How does this environmental tool work in today's politically charged and radically changing climate? Thank you again, and I'd like to introduce everybody to Maya. Thank you so much, Maya, for being with us this evening.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to share this message. I am going to share my screen, make sure that that's all working. Slideshow play from start. So it really is always wonderful to speak with environmental activists, right? People who really care about the environment and who I think really with whom and for whom this message really resonates, because you, like I, have for whatever period of time you've been doing it, I've been doing it for 30 years, have been engaged in environmental advocacy and activism, and in my case, and probably for many of you, engaged in environmental litigation. And through that work, you, like I, have experienced the many, many ways our current system of laws fundamentally fails us. And it is because of my experiences over the last 3 decades in my role as the Delaware Riverkeeper and leader of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, a 4-state advocacy and litigation organization, that I've really come to recognize that we truly need a new pathway forward when it comes to environmental protection. Simply doing more of the same isn't going to cut it. That we need this new path. Now, usually, no matter who the audience, when I say that we need a new pathway forward when it comes to environmental protection, some people become a little bit quizzical and they say, Maya, how is it possible you say we need a new pathway forward when it comes to environmental protection? After all, whether you look at the state level or the federal level, we have hundreds of thousands and hundreds of thousands of laws and policies and programs and regulations and agencies that are all dedicated to protecting the environment. So why do you say we need something more? How is it possible we want something more given all of this? Well, we need and want something more because there is a problem with how this system of laws and how our system of governance when it comes to environmental protection are actually structured and how they work. The laws that we have on the books, regardless of what state you're in, and regardless of whether you're talking about the state level or the federal level, these laws are really focused on legalizing environmental pollution and degradation and harm through a system of reviews and permits. We don't actually have a system of laws and governance that is focused on prevention of environmental pollution, degradation, and harm first. In this system of laws, there are also lots of gaps and lots of loopholes. There are a lot of things whether we're talking about industrial operations or emerging contaminants or well-known contaminants that have been around for a long time that simply are not regulated under this system of laws, either because there's a gap in the law, right? There's an absence of law or regulation, or because some sort of loophole was written in to the laws that we have in place. Often, to the extent that we do have some laws that really are important in making environmental progress, too often there's poor implementation. Sometimes that's intentional, sometimes that's unintentional, sometimes it's because of a lack of resources. Truthfully, I don't really care why. The fact of the matter is the laws are not being fully and fairly implemented, and that's a problem. And inevitably, at some point or another, right, the political winds change and somebody gets into a position of power that doesn't appreciate the importance of environmental protection for protecting every aspect of our lives. And they set about doing the work of rolling back even the laws that we do have. In this system of laws, unfortunately, environmental racism is very literally built in, with communities of color and indigenous communities, immigrant communities, low-income communities, consistently targeted for highly polluting industrial operations and environmentally degrading activities. These communities are not targeted in spite of this system of laws that we have. They're actually targeted because of those laws, because of how they're written, and because of how they're implemented. And as a result, no matter what state you're in, right, you can just do some Googling and you can find all the news headlines that demonstrate that people are drinking contaminated water, breathing polluted air, being forced to live next to toxic sites. We've got species of all kinds that are being devastated. Environmental racism is alive and well. And of course, we're facing a climate crisis. And so whether you look at or listen to how I describe how the laws are written and implemented, or whether you just look at all those news headlines, we can all recognize that something is missing in this system of laws in the state of Iowa and around the United States of America. And I would suggest to you that a very big something missing is that while here in the United States of America, we recognize all kinds of essential fundamental rights that are important to us as a free society and people here in the US, things like the right to free speech and freedom of religion, private property rights, the right to peaceably assemble. While all of these rights are respected and protected in our state and federal constitutions, we do not respect, protect, or recognize this most critical fundamental right to human life here on Earth, the right to a healthy environment, to clean water, to clean air, to a stable climate, to healthy ecosystems. And yet we know that our environment and our environmental rights are worthy of the highest constitutional protection that we give to those other fundamental rights that we hold dear. And that's what constitutional green amendments are all about. They're all about lifting up environmental rights so they are given highest constitutional recognition and protection on par with those other fundamental freedoms that are so essential to our free, happy, and healthy lives here in the United States of America. Now, the thing is, if you want to lift up environmental rights so they are given the highest standing, the same highest standing as those other fundamental rights, not just any language anywhere in the Constitution will do. And we know that because actually almost every single state across our nation talks about the environment. Many even talk about environmental rights in their constitutions already. But only 3 states, as you heard in the introduction, Pennsylvania, Montana, and now New York, those are the only 3 states that have utilized language and placement that literally puts environmental rights on par with those other fundamental rights that are given highest constitutional and legal recognition and protection here in the US. So what do you have to do to lift up environmental rights to that highest standing? Well, there are key criteria that you have to meet. They're what I call Green Amendment criteria. Because the thing is, as you saw, there are a lot of states that talk about the environment, many that even talk about environmental rights. So not while every green amendment is an environmental rights amendment, not every environmental rights amendment is a green amendment. These criteria are key. So that's why I call them my green amendment criteria. First off, the language has to be in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. That is where we recognize those other human, civil, and political rights we hold dear. If we want to give the environment that same highest legal standing, we must place our environmental rights in that same section of the Constitution. That's not just for show. There are actually legal criteria and protections and recognitions that come to bear for the provisions that are in the Bill of Rights section of our state and federal Constitution. So we want all of those elements to come to bear for our environmental rights. We have to be clear that we are talking about the rights of all people. And we have to be clear about what we're talking about, that we're talking about clean water, healthy air, a stable climate, healthy environment, and ecosystems. If we want these rights to be protected, we have to be explicit about what we are actually protecting. The language needs to be self-executing, meaning it has to have legal enforceability in its own right. You don't have to find a law that is spot on to address a fundamental failing that's infringing on your environmental right. If you have a problem, if you can't find a law that's going to help you out, you can turn to the Constitution, because maybe you're facing a situation where there's a gap in the law, or the law as applied isn't working to protect environmental rights. So in those kinds of situations, you can actually turn directly to the constitutional language to try to vindicate your constitutional right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment and deal with whatever is the shortcoming or the problem in the existing laws. The language is ideally, and I would say to me, this is essential, generational, right? We want to make sure that we are protecting our environmental rights, not just for those of us here today, but for those future generations yet to come. That not only ensures that we're doing right by future generations, but it actually also ensures the kind of long-term decision-making and guidance and governance that really puts in place much more effective environmental protections. The language needs to apply to all levels of government, from the local town council to the state legislature to the governor's office, all the regulatory agencies in between. Every time a decision is being made by a government agency, entity, or individual that could affect the environment, we want them to be assuring that the action that they are about to take is going to secure the environmental rights of the people that are among their constituents. That is when we have the best opportunity to make effective change, if we do so at every level of decision making. So we want to make sure that that happens. We don't want to just wait to the end for that last permit to be given by that last agency, because at that point, so much of the damage, if there is damage, if there is inappropriate behavior, so much of that is already locked in, and it's a problem to turn back. So those are just some of the key criteria. There are actually more criteria, but I don't want to go through them all. And we can talk about it in the Q&A, or you can read about it in the book, because it's all in the book. But let's do some oh, look at that beautiful book. So let's also talk broad strokes about how does the Green Amendment change things if we get one passed in the state of Iowa. Well, first off, it does lift up environmental rights to that highest standing. And I really just say to people, just think about how powerfully the right to free speech, how powerfully the right to freedom of religion, how powerfully the right to bear arms are protected, because they are recognized and protected explicitly in the Bill of Rights section of our state and federal constitutions, right? When there is going to be an infringement, or there is a claim of infringement on any one of those rights, people do not sit down and shut up. The advocates rise up and demand justice. The press pays attention. Government officials try to join forces to take action to protect the right. When necessary, the judges come into play through the courts, through judicial determinations, and they work hard to identify whether or not there's been an infringement on the right and then to restore that right if it has been infringed upon. Well, all of that incredible power and positive energy will now come to bear for the environment if you have a constitutional green amendment. It means that when the environment is going to be impacted by governance, right, by governing decision-making, and other rights are being affected, right, like the property rights, well, the environment now becomes a necessary part of the balancing. There are so many situations in environmental scenarios where somebody wants to do something on their property that will be incredibly damaging to everybody else, like a developer wants to do some sort of massive development, strip down a forest, and really cause trouble for everybody else. And the local government council is concerned about what will be the ramifications. The problem is the developer gets to come in and say, hey, I have property rights. You have to pay me if you want to limit what I can do on my property, even though I might impact other people. And the environment is nowhere in this scenario. Well, if you have a constitutional right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment, now when all of those kinds of decisions are being made, the environment can be part of the balancing so that we can avoid harm and ensure protection and equity for all, the property owner, but also for everybody else in the community, right? So anytime you have these kinds of scenarios, you can just make sure that environmental rights are part of the balancing. And that's what ensures that we really have equitable protection for everybody. Government is necessarily refocused on prevention of harm first. They're not going to just hop to the end of the process and say, what permit should I issue? Right at the beginning of the process, they're going to be looking at how to avoid environmental harm, because they now have to undertake all of their governing action through the lens of their constitutional obligation to protect the environment, to protect natural resources, and to protect environmental rights. This is like it becomes a priority consideration in all governing actions. And so it really necessarily refocuses government officials on thinking about, how do I avoid harm first, not just hop to the end and legalize it through permits. We really are protecting future generations. That generational thinking becomes a priority. And if you have constitutional language that entitles future generations to the protection of natural resources and to their environmental rights, that's not just aspirational language that sounds pretty in a constitutional amendment. We have demonstrated in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that that obligation to future generations actually mandates a procedural and substantive change in decision-making. Government officials really do have to undertake their governing responsibilities in a way that will ensure that future generations are protected equitably when it comes to natural resources. It's not that we all get to use everything up today that we want, and then whatever is left over, the future generations get, and then in the future, they try to protect it. No, the decision makers today have to be thinking about, how do I ensure that the natural resources, the benefit of these healthy natural resources we have here right now today, will also be there for future generations. Environmental justice is incredibly empowered because now every individual, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their tribal membership status, their socioeconomics, their gender, their geography, all people have the same constitutional right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. And all government officials become constitutionally obligated to protect the environmental rights of all the people, and they must do so equitably. So we can't have environmental sacrifice zones anymore when we have this kind of constitutional amendment, because that disproportionate impacting of communities of color or low-income communities or indigenous communities becomes immediately suspect, because those people that are being impacted have the same constitutional entitlement as everybody else, and their rights have to be protected equitably on par with everybody else. So it's very empowering for the environmental justice movement. The Green Amendment strengthens the laws that we have on the books. They don't just get tossed out the window. Now, all of the laws that already exist in Iowa are going to now be interpreted through the lens of constitutional environmental rights and the duty to protect natural resources for present and future generations. So it really strengthens how existing laws are interpreted and applied. And when there's a gap in the law or new protections are needed, the Green Amendment can become a powerful foundation for those new protections. If there's a gap in the law, for example, with regards to PFAS, that man-made family of chemicals being used by industry and by the military in ways that has just allowed it to spew out into the environment, including into the drinking water supplies of millions of people. Well, all of that has happened and is happening still today because of a gap in the law, an absence of regulation that prevented the creation and the usage of these man-made family of chemicals in this devastating, dangerous ways. That's really devastating. Again, it's not just drinking water supplies. Farmers are losing their farms. People can't hunt for deer and take their deer meat home because of PFAS contamination, right? The health harms are very dramatic for those who have been exposed. So it's really devastating. Well, if at the time we were learning about this creation and this use of PFAS in these devastating ways, if there had been constitutional green amendments everywhere, people could have turned to their constitutional right to clean water and a healthy environment to secure meaningful government action sooner, before all of this harm was allowed to happen. And it's not just about the law. The Green Amendment passage is also very empowering for advocates, because now when advocates are going forth and doing their good work to protect the forests and the rivers and the wetlands and the trees and their families and the communities that they love, they are not just fighting for these things that they love and that they believe are sacred and should be protected, but they are also fighting for a constitutional right. And that just dramatically changes the playing field. Here in the United States of America, if you are fighting for a constitutional right, it brings a sense of personal empowerment that's important for advocates, but it also makes sure that every government decision maker is listening more carefully to their constituents, because now their constituents are demanding that they honor the Constitution. The goal of a Green Amendment is better decisions. We don't want to get to the courtrooms. We don't want to get to litigate. We want better government decisions in the first place. But the reality of a Green Amendment is when our government officials fundamentally fail us, and we do believe our environmental rights are being infringed upon, we can get access to the courts to vindicate those rights. The Green Amendment movement is a nationwide movement that's starting at the state level. State constitutions are amended all the time, and states have a tremendous level of power when it comes to the environment and environmental protection. So going forth and seeking green amendments at the state level means that we can get this more powerful protection in the near term, which is important. But we also do need a federal green amendment, because the federal government also has a tremendous level of power. But we all know if we try to hop to the federal level right now today, we will fail. And not just because the politics are difficult, but because people don't know about this idea. They don't understand it. They don't understand how it makes a difference. So we have a lot of educating that we have to do, and organizing that we have to do, and activism that we have to undertake. Well, what better way to do all that educating, organizing, and activism towards a federal green amendment than to do it as part of the process of getting that state protection in the near term, right? So we're sort of getting double duty out of our state work when we begin strategically at the state level to pursue our constitutional green amendments. We will know when the time is right. I feel like there'll be a tipping point when it'll be clear that it's time to pursue a federal green amendment. We're clearly not there yet, but we'll know when the time is right. The Green Amendment movement really, though, at this state level is really gaining steam. We have about 10 states where Green Amendment language has been proposed. We have, of course, the 3 states that already have a Green Amendment. The states in that orangey color are states where language is about to be proposed. And the states in yellow are where we have demonstrated interest. In fact, I think in less than a month, we're going to have a Green Amendment proposal in the state of Nevada, which is fun and exciting. So this is the kind of language that's been put forth for Iowa. And so I thought it'd be helpful to take a look at it. It would add to the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, that most important element of the Green Amendment criteria, that every person has the right to a clean and healthy environment, including pure water, clean air, a stable climate, ecologically healthy habitats, You don't have to take a screenshot, by the way, it's on the website.
Okay.
And the preservation of the natural and human health qualities of the environment. The state shall not infringe upon these rights. The state's public natural resources, including its soils, waters, air, flora, fauna, climate, and public lands, are the common property of all the people, including both present and future generations. As trustee of these resources, the state shall conserve, maintain, and restore these resources for the health and the benefit of all the people. This section and the rights stated herein are self-executing and shall be in addition to any rights conferred by the public trust doctrine or common law. Any and all infringements upon these rights shall be subject to strict scrutiny. And that's a legalese. That's an important legal term. You should get that from the Green Amendment Bill of Rights placement, but there's nothing like saying it directly. So if you want to learn more, there is an effort now to try to get a Green Amendment movement going in the state of Iowa. So if you want to learn more and sort of become part of that, which I hope you do, there are a couple ways to engage. There is a website, www.iagreenamendment.org. So you can go there, and that's where you can find the language, or you should be able to find it. If you can't, let me know. Somebody messed up. We also have a new app. That's the Green Amendment Action app. And this is an app dedicated. It operates a little bit like Facebook in terms of posting and things. And it's dedicated entirely to the Green Amendment movement. And in that app, there is a community just for Iowa. I don't think anybody's in it yet because we just got the app last month. So we're just starting to work it up. But if you're in your own state's community, then all the postings that happen that you get notified about that you can see are all Iowa all the time. You're not going to have every other goodness knows what all is happening coming onto your Iowa community platform. All Iowa all the time in terms of the Green Amendment. There is also a national page that you could choose to be a part of if you want to see what's happening in other states. And of course, you can get the book. The book, just the second edition of the book, is just out at the end of last year, and Iowa is definitely in there because it's really valuable that Iowa is considering being on the cutting edge of this powerful Green Amendment movement. So with that, I'm going to leave it so that we can have plenty of time for Q&A, and I will stop my screen. Oh, if you do get the book, every penny gets donated to the Green Amendment movement. I don't get any of the money. I just want you to know that. And there you go.
Oh, fantastic. For those of you who have questions, I see Z has his hand up. I don't know if that was deliberate or not, but if you've written questions in the chat box, Chris is helping coordinate the questions going into the chat box.
And
yeah.
I don't see any questions in the chat box yet, but if you have a question and you'd rather not type in the chat box, do the reactions and raise your hand. Christine and I'll do the best at getting those in order. So
David Zentner, did you have a question?
I did. I was
Okay,
going to
great.
type it in, and I put my hand up by accident. But it was a great presentation, Amaya and Mia, and I just wondered if we could look at some things in PA and Pennsylvania, Montana. Have they been in place long enough that we can be encouraged by what's taking place as a result of them?
All righty. See, I knew all I had to do was keep my slideshow up because this question would come. Do Green Amendment, how are they making a difference in the 3 states that have them? So yes, they are making a difference. Now, the Green Amendment story for Pennsylvania, Montana, and New York are all different. They've all been around for a different period of time. Montana, I'm not going to go into the stories, but we have had enough experience with them to know how they can really powerfully make a difference. First off, I want you to know that green amendments, when they have been brought into the courtroom, it's not just individuals and organizations that are relying on those amendments for whatever their arguments are. We actually have municipal government and state government officials that have also brought forth cases reliant on the amendment, or use the amendment to sort of defend the decisions that they've undertaken that may be getting challenged in court. The first most powerful use of the Pennsylvania Green Amendment, this is sort of the origin story of my founding of the movement. It was there in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where fracking for gas from shale was already happening. The Pennsylvania legislature in 2012 actually passed a law that was going to make it even easier for the frackers to frack. The law was actually written by the fracking industry itself. And it did things like put in place automatic waivers from even minimal environmental protection standards that applied to every other industry. It preempted local zoning authority and mandated that drilling and fracking operations be allowed to happen in every part of every community in terms of the heart of their residential districts. By virtue of this state law, an operating fracking well pad with its 24/7 noise, light, and pollution had to be allowed to be located as close as 300 feet from people's homes. It alleviated the frackers of the obligation to notify people in private drinking water wells that their drinking water had become potentially contaminated by nearby fracking operations, and a lot more. When this law was passed, it was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. And so we at my organization, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, were trying to figure out, like, how can you challenge a law that has actually gone through the entire process and been legitimately passed? How can you challenge it? Well, one of the few things you can do is bring forth a constitutional challenge. And we actually recognize that in the Pennsylvania Constitution, there was this long ignored Environmental Rights Amendment, what I now call a Green Amendment in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. And so we challenged the problematic provisions of this law as being a violation of the people's right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The case went all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which was very conservative at the time. And by the way, we were joined by 7 municipalities that were upset that their zoning authority had been preempted by this state law when it came to fracking operations. And in December of 2013, we got this amazing victory written by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court that said that those provisions of the law would in fact result in a violation of Pennsylvania's Green Amendment, and therefore the provisions were unconstitutional. So they never, ever got any implementation, right? We stopped the bad law before it started. We wouldn't have been able to do that without a constitutional amendment. In the state of Montana, there are a couple of different times, totally different projects, where industrial gold mining operations had been permitted by the state agency and was going to allow really devastating harms to critical natural resources. And in the case of one project, would have touched very remote natural ecosystems that were actually very important to the Yellowstone National Park region, which of course, economically is very dependent on a healthy environment. These permits were challenged because of how they were reviewed and how they were put into place, that they would result in a violation of the Montana Green Amendment. The court agreed. So the permits were voided and were never allowed to be implemented. The agencies could have gone back and fix the problem, right? Like reformulated the permit so it didn't result in a constitutional violation if they were able to do that. In neither of these situations were these permits ever reissued. So that suggests to me that these projects never should have happened, and because of the Green Amendment, they didn't. In Pennsylvania, we're starting to see good government action at the local level being grounded in the Green Amendment. There was a municipality, Marple Township, outside of the city of Philadelphia, a quickly urbanizing community, And they had their last little piece of green space right down there in the corner, which turned out to be an old growth beech tree forest. And it had this high quality stream that ran through it. There was a developer pressing very hard to develop the property. And there were multiple years of advocacy from the community to push back on approvals to the development of this old growth forest. This, again, this last remaining section of green space. In the final analysis, the local municipal officials denied development of the project and used as a cornerstone of their rejection of the development their obligation to protect the natural resources because of the constitutional Green Amendment and to protect the environmental rights of the people. So they grounded this good, important decision in the Green Amendment after, again, being responsive to advocacy from their community. In Montana, there was a project that required test well drilling for drinking water supply. And there was a dispute. The one person who was supposed to drill the well didn't want to, because science emerged that said that if they drilled this test well, that a pollution plume within the aquifer, right, the dynamics of the aquifer would have changed, and this huge pollution plume would have actually been drawn into the aquifer that was the drinking water supply for the city of Bozeman. The state was being expected to enforce that test well drilling, and they didn't want to, because they didn't want to be responsible for contaminating the drinking water supply of an entire town. So as a cornerstone argument for them, they said, we have a constitutional obligation to protect the environmental rights of the people of Bozeman, their right to clean water. And so don't make us enforce this. And the court said, you're right. And they did not have to enforce the test well drilling because that's what was necessary to protect the drinking water supply of Bozeman. So the truth is, I have more examples and I could keep going on, but I won't unless you want me to. But we'll stop for now. But I think what you can see is there are a number of examples. And in fact, if you go on the Iowa website to the resources page and you scroll down to the bottom half, you will see I have a number of write-ups of examples from the 3 states that have green amendments.
Thank you, Maya. That's amazing. Jill Crafton, and then there were several questions in the chat. Jill Crafton had her hand up. Are you still there,
Yeah,
Jill?
so I'm in Minnesota and I serve on a watershed district board, and we encounter problem. I mean, we have to do permitting. And so you see all these different developers coming and pushing for things. And we had one particular project that was on a bluff. There was a valued spring below it. There was rusty patch bumblebee habitat. There were all kinds of environmental issues. And so that really brought some of this to the fore. We do have a Minnesota Environmental Rights Act, and we have a Minnesota Vital Protection Act. And so I was saying, well, why aren't we using this more? And that's what I'm hearing. And then so we had a group of people, 2,500 to 3,000 people that were protesting this project, and they did some litigation. Does this kind of these kind of laws, does that go a long way toward helping us get to like a green amendment?
Well, it won't help you get to a green amendment. It's part of the existing system of laws designed to better protect the environment. And so that's a good thing. And to the extent that it puts in place protections, that's a good thing. But it's not going to be a green amendment because it is going to apply in the places and the spaces that the law itself allows it to be applied. It's going to, whatever the standards or the reviews are that are required in there, once they're fulfilled, it will result in an environmental decision that may, in a certain context, be harmful. The problem with the laws, first off, again, a lot of the laws, and I don't know the law that you're actually talking about, so I can't speak in detail to it, but you know, a lot of laws like the Clean Water Act and the state counterparts, and the Clean Air Act and the state counterparts, the National Environmental Policy Act and the state counterparts, they're about reviews and permits. And if you meet the criteria, you're entitled to get the permit or the approval or the whatever. And in many instances, those protections may be enough to protect critical ecosystems or communities. But there will always be places, spaces, and circumstances where they don't work, where the specific nuances of the environmental condition that you're dealing with will not be protected by that law, or where you already have a community that's already surrounded by 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 20 industrial operations that are spewing pollution into the air and into the water as allowed by their permit. But when you look at that accumulation of harm, the communities living there are being devastated. And so now here comes another industrial operation, and okay, they fulfill the reviews and the permits, they're entitled to pollute too. But now their pollution is being added to what's already there on a community that's already been devastated, or perhaps their pollution is sort of going to tip you over the edge. And it's in those kinds of circumstances where the existing law doesn't work, or doesn't exist, or isn't being properly interpreted and applied by the government agencies. They're interpreting, you know, clean as something very weak, or they're not implementing a law at all that requires action. In all those circumstances, that's when you can turn to the Constitution, because the Constitution is above the law, right? And because it's self-executing, it provides that higher level of protection. So to the extent that you're talking about a piece of legislation, right, an act or a regulation, that has value and it's important, and it becomes an important step in helping to apply a constitutional green amendment when you have one. But at the same point, when those laws aren't working to meet that constitutional level of protecting environmental rights, then the Constitution sort of kicks in and takes over. So I hope that that makes sense and that helps. But my guess is the law that you're talking about requires certain things in certain circumstances. Once those things happen, or those circumstances are fulfilled, right, that those are the boundaries of the law, but it's not always going to work out for the people or for nature. And when it doesn't work right, that's when the Green Amendment can be helpful.
Yeah, they had restrictions on when it could be filed, and if they went past the date, then they couldn't file. So I hear what you're saying. And we have the boundary waters, which we're trying to protect all the time, and that's a huge issue there too. So
Well, and
thank
are you
you.
talking, when you say boundary waters, are you talking about interstate waterways?
Talking about the boundary waters canoe area wilderness. in
Okay.
Upper Minnesota.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Jill. I'm going to read Rick Zarwell's question. It almost picks up Mary Ellen Miller and Mike Carberry and my own questions, but he says it much nicer than I might. Please explain how green amendments gain standing within a state, especially a radically conservative state like Iowa. And Mike Carberry, sorry I didn't talk about blue and red, but radically conservative is an understatement.
So first off, there the way the amendment can be pursued in Iowa is that you have the legislature proposes the amendment, and then you have a majority vote of both of the houses of the legislature. And I'm not positive, I have to remind myself if they have to pass it once or twice. It may be once or twice, and then it goes to the people. So ultimate authority is with the people. I hear you. It is difficult to get a constitutional amendment. And it's not just difficult in Iowa. It's difficult everywhere. There's a Green Amendment proposal in Hawaii. This is the third year. And it just passed through 4 committees, and it's making a lot of progress, but it's not like a sail through. So wherever you are, it's work. But it's work that ultimately comes down to the people, and it comes down to the people holding their legislators accountable to propose and pass an amendment. Ultimately, it will be on the people to vote for the amendment. It's going to be important that the amendment language that's put forth is strong and doesn't get weakened through the legislative process. You have strong language. You have really powerful language in Iowa. So I don't want to pretend that it's going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of strategy, but it's also going to take a lot of like really honest conversation with people. Look, it's not just people who are pro-environment or liberally inclined that need clean water, right? We all need clean water. We all need healthy air. There are many, many very conservative people who have family members who have suffered from asthma attacks or heart attacks. They have kids with ADHD. They have parents with Alzheimer's. These are illnesses that are linked with contaminated air. We have conservative farmers who have lost their farms because of PFAS contamination. I have one of the stories in my book about a farm in New Mexico that was pouring out hundreds of thousands of gallons of milk that they just had to throw away because it was contaminated with PFAS. The farmer estimates that he lost $11 million for all the milk that he had to dump and the cows that he had to destroy because of PFAS contamination, right? So it doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative, Republican, Democrat, right? We all need clean and healthy environment. So a lot of the Green Amendment movement is doing that hard work of taking what it means to have this constitutional right and making it real for every kind of person, so that they understand how this can help them and how it will not harm them. You know, like to explain to a farmer in Iowa, nobody's coming and suing you based on the Green Amendment. The Green Amendment is about government accountability, right? It's not about neighbor versus neighbor. That's an example of a misconception. So there are a lot of it, and that really is sort of part of my job as being a partner in this movement, is to help people understand how amendments actually work, maybe to help with ways of talking about it that have worked in other states, or some of these stories that help make real why this kind of amendment makes a difference. But it is going to be work, but it's going to be worth it, because once you get the Green Amendment, while it's harder to get, it also means that once you have it, it's not going to be stripped away. Laws come and go depending on the winds of politics. Can't happen with the Green Amendment because it is a higher bar, and the ultimate authority lies with the people. And I would suggest to you, very few people are likely to vote against their right to clean water and clean air.
Can I ask a follow-up question then?
Sure.
I'm the one that I'm Rick Zarwell. I haven't been to the IowaGreenAmendment.org site yet. Is there a cadre of people working on this, strategizing how to get this through the legislature then? Where are we in that period of growth to get this accomplished?
Right at the beginning, you are in on the ground floor, Rick.
I'm an old geezer too.
Well, you're obviously somebody that has a lot of good thoughts and a lot of good thinking. And that's part of what this is, right? And this is how Green Amendment movements happen in every state. It really starts with the education and the outreach. And I have a rule that I don't go into a state unless somebody invites me in. I'm kind of like a vampire that way, right? Like, I'm not going to come into Iowa and make this happen for you, but I can come into Iowa and work with you to make it happen. And there's been enough interest in the state, and I've come and spoken to a couple of groups. We have a legislative champion that's put forth good language that we can rally around. So we have a start. But what we really do need is a collective of individuals or organizations, or a combination of the two, that wants to start meeting and talking regularly and figuring out how are we going to make this happen in Iowa.
I do just have to pipe in real quick. We had Irene Damaris present at the Izaak Walton League in Des Moines about a week ago, and she is the new director of the Iowa Interfaith Power and Light Organization, and they have signed on to this. They are a conservative but somewhat liberal group at the same time, faith-based organization. They work a lot with farmers throughout our 99 counties. They're climate-based is one of their main initiatives. And I just wanted to point that out. So I thought that was pretty cool.
You know what, Christy, you just gave me a very important to-do that I will do for tomorrow. So often when we sort of start to get to this point, and I don't think that I've done it for Iowa yet, so apologies, is we actually create a sign-on form for organizations. And it's very simple. It just says, I support the Green Amendment that does blah, blah, blah. And usually we quote the language. And then that allows us to keep track of the organizations that are, as you say, signing on in support. We can list them on the website and link to their website. So it sort of helps lift them up as an emerging leader in this effort. And we know who to stay in touch with. So I'm going to create that sign on. It's just a Google form tomorrow. And I'm going to send it to you. And maybe you could send it on to them or others that you think might want to, and then we just, the truth is, as with any good grassroots movement in the early stages, we're all just trying to figure and muddle together. And then it starts to become clear. And we're kind of at that stage. But I'm going to send you that form. I'm going to write myself a to-do on this brown paper bag because I don't have paper around.
She's actually at an Airbnb in New Mexico on her travels.
Yeah.
So-
And on the meeting chat, I want to call out these two comments. One from David Zentner Z was recon, and one from Karen. That the discussion around a green constitutional amendment, even if it fails, should add value to caring for our planet. And Carolyn asking the very, very basic question, why wouldn't people want a green amendment, assuming they share a conservation value?
So they're both very astute. And I will say, Dave, that it's actually one of the points I have like a benefits. And I agree with you. Simply having the conversation about constitutional environmental rights, this idea that we don't have this right, even though people are told all the time, you have a right to clean water and clean air. No, you don't, but you can get it, right? Like, and helping people change their language and their expectations, that empowerment that comes, as you said, just from the discussion, just from the organizing, is really uplifting. So you're spot on that. And Caroline, I will say to you, I agree with you. When it comes to the people, there's always overwhelming support. Oddly, there are people who vote no. The trick really is you have to get past the industry opposition, and their opposition is always the same, and it's always a mischaracterization. And I know what their talking points are. And they never come up with anything new or original. And so that's one of the things I can do as a partner. We anticipate that so that legislators don't buy into that BS, nor do other people. But no surprise, there are some that will come out against, but I do believe firmly that the vast majority of the people really get it, and they want this protection, and working together and being honest with them about what this does and doesn't do helps get everybody there.
Good. Thank you. And Mike Calvary has one last question. We're going to take this one last one and we'll see where we go.
Yeah, thanks, Chris and Christine, for having this. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but we passed a constitutional amendment, I believe 12 years ago, for conservation and water quality. And all it required was the next sales tax be raised, and 3/8 of a cent then goes to water conservation and land conservation, et cetera. And the Farm Bureau has fought like hell to get that, prevent that from being passed, anybody raising the sales tax. And I've been trying at the State House, working, I think, 5 years now to get a soil health bill through. Farm Bureau, excuse me, fights like hell because they don't want to admit, they don't want the word soil health anywhere in the Iowa code, because then they would have to admit that maybe we have a problem. So we are going to face some serious odds here against the Farm Bureau, because the Farm Bureau runs this state. And so this is going to be a very heavy lift if you're going to try to do it. And I look forward to seeing how you can counter some of that backlash from basically the Farm Bureau and the commodity groups that don't want to admit that what they're currently doing in their industrial ag system is not the perfect system. Thank you.
So you're not a Debbie Downer, right? It's always good, right? That's fine to recognize that it's a challenge. And it's really important to recognize who it is we need to convince and who are going to be our naysayers. So we can talk about them, to them, maybe change their minds. If we can't change their minds, how do we neutralize them or prevent them from convincing others? So I don't view you as a Debbie Downer. We're going to be victorious. It's just a matter of time.
That is true. What Mike Carberry is stating, though, this I will passed through the people by like 69%. So we, the people, 12 years ago voted on that. So the Green Amendment comes along. Yeah, we all want that. So we get another 70% that said, yeah, we want that Green Amendment, but then it sits in the legislation and it can't get passed.
So first off, and I'm hearing different terms. So I want to be clear that we're talking about a constitutional amendment versus a piece of legislation.
Okay.
Right? So that is very different. And
Okay.
when your government officials ignore it or don't properly utilize it, right? When it's a law, frankly, they have the power to do that. Very often deciding whether or not to enforce a law is within the jurisdiction of the regulatory agency. How to interpret the terms within a law is within the jurisdiction of the government entities. When it comes to the constitutional amendment, right, there is a way that those terms get interpreted in the first instance by the legislative branch and the executive branch. But when we can demonstrate that interpretation or application results in a problem that rises to the constitutional level, that's when we can go get the courts involved. And that becomes a different playing field. And that becomes a different body of argument, and how you make those arguments. It's sort of a whole different thing. And now the people are on par with those government officials and can't just be poo-pooed away. Now, that being said, it does not mean that you may not have in your journey, Green Amendment journey, an unscrupulous judge or justices that are going to intentionally misinterpret the law and try to rob it of its legal strength. That is actually what happened in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That was able to be that happened in part because stupid people brought stupid legal actions making stupid claims, and they handed the justices the opportunity to misinterpret and misapply the law. And that was a problem. But because it was in the Constitution, when that right set of facts, that incredible overreach by those government officials came forth in that pro-fracking law, we were able to turn to the Constitution, make our case, and overturn those decades of bad precedent and breathe legal life into the amendment. We can look to the civil rights movement, the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, how they were misinterpreted, misutilized, right? People did not get the protections that they promised for far too long. But then the right set of facts, the right case, the right movement came along, and people brought those legal actions that turned that around and set the record right, overturn that bad precedent. So I don't pretend that it's easy, and I don't pretend that it's an instant panacea for all the harms that you face. And I don't pretend that you may not have either stupid lawyers or unscrupulous justices that might mess it up in the first instance. But I do promise you that it is worth it. And if you get this protection, it will make a meaningful difference. And I also believe, because of our Green Amendment movement, because we have 3 states where we have powerful precedent that we can turn to, because this is part of a growing dialogue and demand for change when it comes to the environment, it is going to be harder and harder and harder for those bad decisions and bad precedents to come down, because we're sort of we are transforming and changing the legal construct and the concept state by state by state. And there is synergistic power, I believe, and I've seen it in how the movement sort of transforms and has that mutually reinforcing benefit.
And thank
And
you,
if you
Maya.
don't try, you're not going to get it. So
There's that, isn't there? And Maya, I want to recognize Chuck Eisenhart, who's on this call, who put a very nice comment in the chat. Chuck, would you like a couple of seconds to tell us what what's going on in the Iowa legislature?
And there you go. If I can manage to unmute myself, I will. Thanks. I would never dream of trying to promote and educate Iowans on this better than she can, which is why I hope she'll get a lot of work here. And I hope some of you will find other audiences for her to speak with. I think for the last at least 7 to 12 years now, we've been fighting all sorts of uphill battles in Iowa. And the more you focus on the barriers, the less you recognize the opportunities to engage the people in kind of retaking their government. And so that's why I posted online the real 3 driving criteria that I think about, and what even legislators in the minority like me can do to create positive conversations. And that is, I see this as an opportunity to reunite the conservation environmental groups and movements that have been very deliberately divided by opponents to that 2010 constitutional amendment, who really don't want any more money being spent on conservation. So they've come up with all sorts of proposals that have had the result of pitting these various groups against each other. And I see this as an opportunity not to supplant that I will effort, but to create something else that people can focus on, that they can agree on. I think the bigger facts are that this will really energize and organize younger voters if we can find a way to get in front of them and marshal their energies and connections and willingness to engage at, if we can find some just in time, I call it flash mob politics, that they kind of like. They don't like to go to meetings, but they like to do stuff. And moreover, I think somebody else made a comment like this, that this is really a discussion tool that once we get down into the communities and meet with groups, it really allows people to raise and talk about the environmental issues that they really care about at the grassroots level, which may lead to, conversations about what else, in addition to a green amendment, we can do to address those issues at the local level, and what we can do to organize for the long haul. So I don't see this as a quick fix. As we mentioned, it's been 13 years now since that amendment. We're still fighting to get the funding for it. So this green amendment may take another 13 years, but I hope to see it signed or see it pass on from my nursing home, wherever that might be. The other question was raised is, what's the status of it right now? Typically, when you introduce legislation, in order to build support, the chief sponsor would go around to other legislators and ask them to sign on. That's what we did in 2021. Got numerous co-sponsors. That's not what I'm doing now. I did inform all the House members, Republican and Democrat, that this language has been drafted and it's ready for introduction. And did they want to come to my desk and sign on? They're welcome to. A few have, but ultimately it's people who sign on to this, and they can do that either before or after it's actually introduced. It'll happen because their constituents call them up and ask them or tell them that they want them to do that. And I think it has to come from their own grassroots voters. It'll be a lot more meaningful to them as well, I think, to hear it from that vantage point. And it'll also encourage them to actually put their own shoulders to the wheel and not say, oh, sure, I'll sign on to that, and then they forget about it and go to work on something else. So the strategy is, I'm not going to ask any more legislators to co-sponsor it. Anybody who's approached by their own constituents or somebody they know who's encouraged them to sign it, they can come and sign on at any time. And I think that's kind of one of the action steps that should come out of any meeting, including this one. Call up your legislator tomorrow, say you've heard this bill is ready to be introduced, ask them to co-sponsor it. When will that be done? Actually, I just decided tonight. I went online and found out what days are coming up here that might be symbolic. International World Water Day, sponsored by the United Nations, is March 22nd. So I'm going to time the introduction of this bill that week of March 22nd. I think clean water, water quality is probably the leading issue in Iowa, environmental issue in Iowa at this point. So I think we could use that day in any meetings or celebrations we have to bring attention to the Green Amendment in Iowa and how the potential to protect our water. It's one of the tools that we might have in the future to protect our water. That's when the language that Maya showed you on the screen will be publicly available and actually inscribed in the House Journal as a House Joint Resolution. No illusions that that's going to be brought up, even discussed this session. It'll be good for the rest of this General Assembly through April of next year. So we'll see what kind of momentum we could build towards getting it discussed next year. But again, at this point, the actual resolution is an organizing tool to rally around and to educate people. And I think with Maya's help, I'll just mention that we've already discussed having her come to Iowa once or twice over the next several months to do a book tour and get her in front of people in our communities to talk about this in front of those groups of, maybe some of those college students before they leave in May. We can get her in front of some college audiences, and hopefully if community groups like those that many of you are part of can be ready to engage and activate them at that time, I think our strategy will be well underway in just these first several weeks.
Thanks, Chuck. We really appreciate your being here. Kevin Lee, you say Luther College. Do you want to unmute and tell us what Luther College has? Okay, and Vern Tigas saying that the Dallas County Soil and Water Commission is one of his places to be, and that maybe he can get them to sign off on the bill. So, Christine, we're running at 8:15 already.
Yeah.
And we've got lots more and lots of energy around this. Can we invite Maya to come maybe to the Raccoon River Watershed Conference in April, or the rest of you think where we can get her on a Zoom or in person? This, I haven't gotten completely through the book. If you need a copy, I know that it was Chuck Eisenhart, wasn't it, who got us some copies? And so there are lots of us out here with copies and are reading up, and we'll get those out for you to share. Christine, maybe in your follow-up to this meeting, you can get us some more information and make sure that we all have all of the information for the websites and so forth.
Absolutely. I always send out a follow-up for the people who registered as well, so they can have a link to the YouTube if they missed it, and with some of the links as well.
Okay, and all of you who didn't, if I didn't get to your question, I apologize. You have Christine's email from the Zoom, and I hope you will take a chance to send questions to her, and we'll see what we can do about getting you some more information. I'm going to send it back now to you, Christine, for your follow-up or
All
your
right.
okay.
Well, We did pretty well. We still have 23 on out of 35 past 8 o'clock. So that's good. Everybody was willing to share some green love this evening on Valentine's. So thank you so much, Maya, for all your efforts and this amazing work that you're doing. It is inspiring, even though sometimes we get a little down about some of the obstacles in our way, but it is inspiring to know that you're still a cheerleader about it. And thank you, I think, Rep. Chuck Eisenhart, for all your efforts as well. And for the rest of you who are still on, I know I see some names that I recognize well that are also great contributors. So thank you very much. And we'll see you in Iowa, and we'll definitely keep everybody posted.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening and the opportunity, and thanks for caring. And you're very lucky to have Representative Eisenhart. He really cares, as do all of you. So I look forward to working together.
Thank you, Maya.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Maya and Christine.
Thank you very much.
Really fabulous, really powerful.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Have a great evening.